The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus, again in reply, spoke to the chief priests and elders of the people in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. He dispatched his servants to summon the invited guests to the feast, but they refused to come. A second time he sent other servants, saying, 'Tell those invited, behold, I have prepared my banquet. My calves and fattened cattle are killed, and everything is ready. Come to the feast.' Some ignored the invitation and went away, one to his farm, another to his business. The rest laid hold of his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged and sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The feast is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy to come. Go out, therefore, into the main roads, and invite to the feast whomever you find.' The servants went out into the streets and gathered all they found, bad and good alike, and the hall was filled with guests." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
So I noticed when we stood for the gospel, nobody told me. Oops. All right. So the first reading says to us, "On this mountain the Lord of hosts will provide for all peoples, rich, juicy foods, wonderful wines." When is that going to happen? It actually says in the reading, on that day. Now I thought that day came and went. I thought that day was the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. How come there's still war? How come there's still poverty? How come there's still hunger? How come when Jesus comes to us with the face of a desperate immigrant who's looking for something better for his family, we sometimes look at them and say they're criminals? How come when Jesus comes to us with the face of a person of a different orientation, we look at them sometimes and say there's something wrong or bad about them, rather than saying that's God's child? That's the problem of evil in our world, sin in our world. It's a reality. But still, what about that day? Well, I learned something about that day, and I learned something about the problem of evil when I was with a group in Israel, of all places. I was there with a group of 6 Catholic kids, 6 Jewish kids, and a priest and a rabbi, and that's not the beginning of a bad joke. We were there to learn about each other's faith and culture. And I know the rabbi and I, we said to each other, I hope these kids are getting it because we are learning so much. Well, one morning at breakfast, the kids came up to the rabbi and they asked exactly the question of, why is there evil in the world? And his answer was wonderful. He says, we believe that God is all good, all loving, and all powerful. And so we raise that question, why is there evil in the world? Because there's evil in the world, we have to think, maybe God's not all good, or not all loving, or not all powerful. He says, we choose to believe that God is not all powerful. And when he said it, the kids went, what? He said, God gave away some of his power when he gave you and me free will. That's why there's still evil in the world. We choose. God invites. God calls. But God doesn't mandate. He didn't tie up the people and bring them to that feast. He invited. And we make choices. You know, it's interesting, in different gospel stories it says that Jesus couldn't perform miracles in that town because their faith was so weak. Or when he healed someone, he would say to them, your faith healed you. In other words, we do cooperate with God. We do have some of that power. And you know, that same rabbi taught me something about the Jews waiting for Jesus to come to them, or waiting for their Messiah. He said, we believe that if just once everybody in the world would together honor the Sabbath, we will have in that day made an environment in which the Messiah would want to come. But everybody has to do it. I think he named that day that we heard about in the first reading. That day is the day when all of us open our hearts to the wonder of God's power and love. All of us have to do it. You know, a couple of years ago I was talking to a friend of mine who's a priest, and we were talking about the problems in the world at that time. And at one point I jokingly said, you know, if they'd only ask us, we have the answers. And he said, I do have the answer. With such authority, I was like, okay, what is it? He said, we all got to pray. And he says, I'm not talking about telling God what we want. He says, getting on our knees and saying, God, what do you want from me? And then doing it. And that's when that day will come. When it will be resolved. But we all have to do that. Each one of us has to take the time to make that choice every single day. You know, at the end of Mass, we're going to sing, Let There Be Peace on Earth. And I know I'm not going to make it down the aisle being able to get the words out because my voice will be cracking, because it's a powerful song. Let it begin with me. If you get YouTube, what I invite you to do is go to YouTube and look up Let There Be Peace on Earth at Ground Zero. When Pope Francis was here, at the bottom, way down, 5 stories down or something like that, there was a prayer service. And it was him, and there was other priests, and there was rabbis, and there was Muslim leaders and Hindu leaders, people from all over the world. And these children, teenagers, young children, came out and sang Let There Be Peace on Earth. And they were a rainbow of people. There was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid, a red-headed kid, but there was also Asians. There's people of all different tones of browns and black, all singing together, Let There Be Peace on Earth, and let it begin with me. And they were singing it at a place where it was really hell on earth. But they were saying, let's change it. Let's do what we heard in that opening song, swords into plowshares. Let's be peacemakers. I learned about one of the ways that we can make that day happen, and it looks like we're not too close to it right now with what's going on in Israel and Ukraine and all these other places in the world that are having difficulties. But I learned something in this room almost a year ago. Right before Thanksgiving, we had a prayer service with the Methodists and the Episcopalian communities. And the Methodist Church had a children's choir, and they were going to sing at a certain point. And as they're setting up the microphones right over here, and the kids are going to come, Mike Keller set them up, and the woman in charge of the choir said to him, Mike, that one pointed up. He wasn't sure exactly what she was talking about. He had an idea. But the kids got up, and they sang, Let There Be Peace on Earth. And they get to the point, with God as our Father, brothers all are we, let me walk with my brother in perfect harmony. And that's when I realized why that microphone was different, because the kid who was standing by that microphone, he sang, in perfect harmony. Wow. His voice was more about quantity than quality. But it was beautiful, because they let him sing. They said to him, in letting him be in that choir, you matter more than your voice. And somewhere in his life, he's going to start to understand that he is gifted. He'll find other gifts, but he knows first he is gift. Each one of us is gift. And if we can honor each one of us as children of God and as gifts, then we'll be a little bit closer to peace. Will we resolve things in Israel, in Gaza Strip, in Ukraine? No. But you know what we might do? We might stop another Columbine or other mass shooting from happening, because if somebody knows their gift, knows they're accepted, knows they're loved, then even when they have a difficult day, they can fall back on that. And they won't fall into the darkness, the twistedness that leads people to do some of the violent, horrible things that are going on in our world. You never know. You know, last night I was talking to a family whose son, he was one of our altar servers, he's now in the Army Reserves, and he was called up to duty a few months ago and was going to do a few months in Kuwait. But that's the Middle East. I mean, there's nothing happening there, but they've got to be on alert. So I saw his father. I said, "Is everything all right with Greg?" He said, "Yes, he's in Kuwait, and I haven't spoken to him, but everything seems to be okay." And as we're talking, his younger brother, who was 12 years old, came up. And I just said to him, "I'm sorry that you have to grow up in this kind of world." And his father put his arm around him and said, "Yeah, but maybe he'll be the one to change it." Wow. If we treat each person that way, maybe you'll be the one to change it, to heal it. Maybe together, you and I can do it. So, let's make this celebration that feast that we heard about in the first reading. Let's make a decision today that I'm going to live as if it's that day. I'm going to do what I can to make it that day, because I'm going to live as a true disciple of Christ, who is the Prince of Peace. Let's please pray for peace in our relationships, in our workplaces, in our families, in our government, and in our world. Let's stand and pray for each other.